Chuck Renstrom, our guest this morning at the breakfast table. And we have to say right up front, thanks to his daughter who owns a little bake shop for bringing some delicious, what do you call those things, Chuck?
Those are cake pops.
Cake pops. Those were awesome. Where's her store, by the way?
Yeah, give her a plug.
Well, it's not a walk-in store, but it's called Sweet Ride Bake Shop. And her bakery is at 8th and Kipling.
Okay. Sweet Ride
Bake Shop.
All right, we'll talk about what Chuck sees that we don't ordinarily see in a moment. But give us a little background, who you are, and you're a brother in Christ, obviously, and we're happy to have you on. You have a wonderful testimony. But a little bit of your life and how it came to see these things that we don't ordinarily see.
Well, the pictures that I have in the book here kind of started by an accident. I have a grandson who played football at high school that is near C470, and I did a big banner for them his junior and senior year. And the banner was 5 feet high and 47 feet wide. Wow. And I photographed all of the players against a green screen so I could extract them and put them in any order that I wanted to. And I thought, since they're near the hogback there, I would take pictures of some rock formations, and I would use those as background props. And I used a technique called high dynamic range photography, where you take a series of photographs of the same subject but at different exposures. And so you have the middle exposure that is right on, and then you have some that are overexposed and some that are underexposed. And when you combine those in the computer, it brings out details and the highlights and the shadows that you don't normally see. And so I was fascinated when I started processing these images at what I saw. And the first one I looked at, I thought, man, was I that close to a rattlesnake? But it was not a snake. It was rock, but it was kind of had the coloring of a rattlesnake. And it was an eel of some kind, and it had wrapped itself around a smaller animal. And below that, with this technique, was the skeleton of another animal that I think was a small dinosaur. And by the way, half of all the dinosaur species that we know about were the size of a lamb or a sheep or smaller. A lot of them the size of a chicken.
What?
Really?
Yes. But anyway, I saw those, and so that piqued my interest. And so I went back to the location, and I started looking for things that would present themselves in the rock formations, and I was really fascinated by what I found. And so for the next four and a half years, I went around the state, and a lot of the hills just west of Denver is just loaded with these things. And that's the basis of the photographs that I found that are in my book now.
Wow.
Wow.
It is really loaded with amazing pictures. How many pictures do you think you have in this particular book?
Well, I think probably about 125 pictures.
And that's just a small portion of the pictures you took?
I took over 10,000 pictures in this project.
Wow. All these creatures were here in Colorado.
That's right, and many of them marine creatures, and at high elevations. Some of these were at the top of 14,000-foot mountains. Like Mount Evans and other places around that, and it's just, scientists have said for many years that there was a shallow sea here in Colorado, but Colorado is already the highest state, and not because of the marijuana, but it's the highest state in the United States with an average, I believe, around 6,500 feet above sea level. And so a shallow sea, by definition, is 200 meters or about 650 feet. And here we have, 13,000, 14,000 feet.
Sure.
And you find these marine creatures at those elevations.
And your explanation of that?
Well, it has to be the flood. I was showing some of the pictures to a secular paleontologist, and he said, we've had researchers, we've had academicians, we've had geologists, all sorts of scientists that have studied these rock formations for many years. And he said, for over 100 years, as a matter of fact. And he said, we've never seen anything like this.
Really?
But then he said, if you're seeing what you think you're seeing, you'd have to believe in Noah's flood. And I said, well, actually, I do. Well, he was being sarcastic, and he didn't, so the attitude changed there a little bit.
Isn't that something? Even at showing him these photographs, he couldn't believe his own eyes.
Right.
But he said it himself.
He
Those
said it
words
himself.
came out of his mouth.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, my goodness. Do you know, I have heard that the Native Americans or certain tribes actually have a story of a flood. In your research, did you find that?
Yes, there are flood legends that are in many, many cultures around the world. And of course, they're not the biblical ones, but almost every culture talks about the flood and the deluge and what happened. And as a matter of fact, most cultures have dinosaurs, or dragons, as they called them, going back in their history and their ancestors. Even over in the temple at Angkor Wat, there are carvings in one of the ancient temples there that show what looks like a stegosaurus. And you'll find these things all over. And so I think some of the legends that we read about in the past are actually rooted in fact. You know, they may have been embellished over the years, but the Bible talks about dragons. It talks about dinosaurs. It talks about Behemoth. It talks about Leviathan. And now I don't think I've found Leviathan or Behemoth in these photographs that I've taken, but I have found what I think is a dragon, and it's pretty obvious that what it is here in the book.
Well, there are some fascinating pictures. We'll have you describe some in a bit, and you're not going to tell us exact locations, and we understand that because there are some cruel people out there that want to make destruction out of these things.
Right.
But we'll talk a little bit about that too when we come back. But right now, in case somebody needs to leave us, this book is available where?
Well, right now it's available at Tattered Cover. And you can get it online as well, although the mechanism for taking payments is still in the process of being set up. And that would be at my website, chuckrenstrom.com.
Okay, and the name of the book is Do You See What I See? Chuck Renstrom. Chuck Renstrom, our guest, he is a fabulous photographer, and he's written the book, Do You See What I See? Actually, it's mainly pictures of things that he's seen in the high-altitude evidence of the worldwide flood. And, of course, that explains a lot of what we see in Colorado or don't see, but you do. On my hikes now, I'm going to be looking for this stuff.
Yeah, a lot of people have said that they'll never look at rock formations
the
same way.
sure.
Well, take us back to the flood, the biblical account.
Well, the Bible says that not only did it rain for 40 days and 40 nights, but all of the fountains of the great deep were opened up. And by the way, just in the last few years, scientists have discovered an ocean below the ocean that's about 600 miles below the Earth's crust. And they say that there's more water in there than in all of the oceans of the world combined.
Wow. Oh, my
What?
goodness.
Oh, my goodness.
But when these eruptions occurred and the waters were released from the depths, from the Earth, there was a lot of volcanic activity as well. And all of this mixing up in the violence of these volcanic eruptions under the water stirred up a lot of minerals. It heated them. There's a lot of sediment that came, and the floods that occurred carried a lot of these sediments and minerals, and they are what preserved the shapes of the animals, because the oxygen content would have decomposed, and we would only have powder.
Sure.
And so I believe that the sediments that coated these animals preserved their shapes and prevented oxygen from getting in and making them decompose. And so that's what I believe is here in all these rock formations. Now, not every rock formation has animals in it, but many of them do. And it's really interesting to see what there is there.
What was your favorite find, your favorite picture?
I think my favorite, well, I have a couple, but I think maybe the 60-foot-long worm that's in the side of a cliff. And again, the waters that as they exited from the earth, they were drained off from the earth, the surface of the earth, as the Bible says, carved these canyons.
Yeah.
And I think it's the flood that was drained off that carved the Great Grand Canyon. And also, we saw in Mount St. Helens, back in around 1980 or so, and all of the destruction and the water that was carried from that carved a mini Grand Canyon, and it happened in just hours.
Right.
Wow.
So it's not the millions or billions of years that the Colorado River carved the Grand Canyon. That's just not believable.
Yeah, it didn't have to be that.
No.
Chuck, is your background in geology, photography, both, or neither?
Well, it's in photography.
Huh.
I started a portrait studio in 1978. I did a lot of weddings and a lot of portraits, but I also did some commercial work, and then I also used that information that I learned to start a business where we did color separations, and we did layout and graphic design for other print shops, and that developed into digital printing. But then we also did fine art reproductions. So artists would paint a painting, they'd bring it to me, we'd capture it with a high-resolution camera, and then we print it onto watercolor paper or canvas, depending on the subject matter. And in many cases, you couldn't tell the difference between the original and the copies.
Wow.
Technology's gotten that good.
Wow. And many of those practices probably play into the book that you have here today.
Well, yes, they do. Yeah, I think that gave me the abilities to do the graphic design and the layout and everything in here.
Beautiful book.
There's the 60-foot worm. What page is that on?
That is on page 36.
36. We saw that in here when we first looked. Oh, there it is. My goodness. Okay, we're looking at this. So it's like orangey, beige, kind of in color. What kind of rock is that set in?
Well, it's sedimentary rock.
Okay.
And what I've done here on these pages, and in fact on a number of them, is that I've isolated the actual subject that I was photographing by subduing the color around it.
I see. Okay.
Otherwise, if you just look at this, if you were to see it, you probably wouldn't see it.
Okay.
And it would just look like the face of a cliff.
Is that a little animal underneath it as well?
It's some kind of a fish or
I see that.
Some kind of a marine animal.
Now, sometimes people look at something, they say, oh, like at a cloud, like, oh, that looks like, Uncle Fred with the big nose or something like that. But this goes way beyond that.
Well, it does, and I think that they're just, the shapes are so unique and they're so definitive that you just can't deny that these were animals at one time, and they were killed or transported to the areas by the flood. Some of these were, like I said before, at the top of 14,000-foot mountains. And marine animals don't belong up there.
Nope.
But they're found side by side with land animals. And so that has to show that there was a catastrophic event, and that they were deposited there together.
Are there any human fossils near these?
Well, I have found on the next, if you look on page 38.
That's what I wanted to get to. This is amazing.
There is the hand of a giant. And in 2 Samuel, it says, "And there was yet a battle in Gath, where was a man of great stature, that had on every hand 6 fingers, and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number, and he also was born to the giant." And here is the hand, and it's very obvious that it's a hand, but it's got 6 fingers on it. And that's what the Bible describes as giants having. And from the top of the top finger down to the wrist, which is what I have here in the picture, is about 12 feet. And so it's just, it's huge. And I believe that this was one of the giants that was mentioned in the Bible.
That is absolutely amazing to me. Spiritually, as you went through this, what happened to you? Because I know you couldn't do something like this and not experience some sort of epiphany.
Well, you remember when I told you about my grandson's banner that I did?
Sure.
When I was doing that, I just whispered a prayer because I didn't see anything good coming out of doing this. And I said, I just asked the Lord that he would be glorified in this in some way. And so it was during that project that I discovered these things. And it just reinforced that evolution is not viable, and that we didn't all come from a single-cell amoeba someplace, but that God created all of creation. And he did it in 6 literal days. And I believe that the earth is not millions or billions of years old. In fact, when I was in high school, my early years of high school, we were taught that the Earth was between 100,000 and 200,000 years old. And so now in the 50 years plus since I graduated from high school, we are up to 4.3 and some say 4.7 billion years old.
Right.
So it's a rescuing mechanism for evolutionists that they think if they just add more time, that then it becomes possible.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of problems with that theory, including the distance from the moon to the Earth. And if you go backwards in time, even 60,000 years ago, the Earth would be connected to the moon. And it's just not possible.
Right.
You know, we have all of these things.
Yeah.
So
And carbon dating is flawed, from what I understand.
it is, yeah.
Yet they continue to use carbon dating and
Yes.
monkeys. Carbon dating and monkeys.
Radio halo dating and there are a lot of things that they use, but they're just, you would have to know what the conditions were like from the beginning in order for these things to work.
Yeah.
It's like a candle. You know, you buy a candle from a manufacturer and you can measure the rate of the burn. Let's say it's an inch an hour. And when it gets down to a certain point, you can tell what the rate is. Well, if you try to back that up, you don't know how long that has been burning. Mm-hmm. And maybe the candle manufacturer made candles that were 6 times as high or something. You just don't know. And so you'd have to know the conditions or the amount of radioactive material that are in the rock formations. You can measure the rate now, but it doesn't mean that it was the same as it was when it was created.
Wow, that is
wow,
great.
Fascinating.
Well, you can see what Chuck has seen too, and what we're looking at. If you see the book, "Do You See What I See" by Chuck Renstrom, and again, that's at Tattered Cover.
Yes,
and also on your website.
Correct.
Yeah, as we look at Chuck's book, we're saying praise the Lord. Just amazing. Mm-hmm. And Chuck, we know why our boss, Jack Pellin, has so many weird jokes. He's hanging out with you too.
One right after another.
You got to give us one. Give us one on the air.
Well, I got on an elevator with a police officer the other day.
Yeah.
I knew right then I was going down.
We've heard about a dozen of these.
I'm telling you, one right after another. That's great.
Well, we're going to wrap up our conversation, Chuck. Unfortunately, we'd love to go all morning with this, but what haven't you said that you'd like to say?
Well, there are a couple of ministries that I have drawn on for a lot of my information. Scientists that are on the staffs there and just excellent PhDs. One of the organizations is Answers in Genesis. The other one is the Institute for Creation Research. And they are amazing. And they have scientists that have really dug into this. And the more information that has come out, the more evolution really looks foolish.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I've heard people take a critical view of Ken Ham as though, what does he know? Well, he's a sharp guy, but he didn't come up with all this stuff himself. He has scientists working with him.
He has a staff of PhDs, and they're brilliant. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's one, Andrew Snelling, who's a PhD in geology. His work is renowned around the world. And I read one of his books. It's not an easy read, but it's like a textbook. But it really goes into depth in how the waves and so forth deposited the sand and the limestone and all of that. It's very interesting if you're interested in the scientific aspect of it, and it explains what my book can't explain. In just in the photographs, but it really underpins everything.
Now, you told us earlier off the air that you have a whole lot more pictures like this. Are you going to come up with a second book?
Well, I'm thinking about it, if I can talk my wife into giving me the time to do it. But I have a lot of pictures, and there are some areas that I didn't really get to that I wanted to photograph that may be the fodder for another book.
Are there any of these animals that exist, or are all these all gone?
Well, there's one in there that kind of looks like an alligator or a crocodile, but it's smooth instead of all of the little horny things that are on it, the bumps and so forth. But and there's one that looks like a turtle that's in there. That's towards the end. But most of them are not things that I could identify. There are some marine invertebrates that are in there, that are little tiny ones that are maybe 2 inches long, and but they were impressed in the rock formations as well.
Wow.
You mentioned earlier that scientists believe or know, I forgot what word you used, that there's an ocean under the ocean.
Yes.
A whole lot more water down there. So there's some kind of a crust between the bottom of the ocean and this other ocean.
Yes.
Just a wild guess. Do you think there's other creatures down there?
It very well could be. I don't know. But God created everything in 6 days. And in the one day, He created all of the animals that lived in the ocean, and on day 6, He created all of the land animals, including man, and that included dinosaurs. So we know that dinosaurs and man lived contemporaneously, and so it's
and the evidence shows that.
It does. Yes,
geological evidence.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they didn't die out 65 million years ago.
Yeah. I whenever I think about that, I think God had fun creating. He had a blast.
Yes. And think of the intellect that Adam had to have in naming all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Wow. We think we know something, but wow.
I couldn't probably come up with 25 names.
I'm telling you.
I know.
I'd say he was inspired.
Right.
What the Ark down in Kentucky.
Yes.
I visited that not too long ago with some of my relatives, and it brought out the point to me that before the flood, perhaps 2,000 years after creation, the flood, that they weren't just a bunch of cavemen going around saying ugh.
Right.
They were intelligent people
right.
with a lot of development, a lot of technology,
yes.
which all was destroyed. I can imagine Noah getting out of the boat and saying, "It's all gone."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No cell towers anymore.
Just so much there. There's just so much there. Start with the Bible, and then make that your belief.
That's right.
And look at the evidence.
Right. We all have different worldviews. We can look at the same evidence. Two people can look at it and come to different conclusions based on what they see.
Mm-hmm.
And I choose to look at the evidence through the lens of the Bible.
Well, we join you in that.
Yes, we do.
That's great.
Do You See What I See is the name of the book, and Chuck Renstrom is the photographer-author.
All right. Available at...
Tattercover and on my website, chuckrenstrom.com.
It's one of these tabletop books, but it's great to have in your house when a neighbor or friend comes in and looks at that and says, what's that?
That's right, yeah. I think it's a great tool for witnessing to unbelieving people.
Thank you, Chuck, for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful book.